Hello, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Interim Dean Michael Scharf, and I want to give you a big Case Western Reserve Law School welcome to today's lunch event. We're really excited about this. It's our first Dean's Distinguished Alumni Lecture of the year, and today we have Jeff Herman, class of '85, who has one of the most interesting and unusual practices of any of our alums. And I met him a couple of months ago when we were doing a tour of our alumni in Florida. And Jeff has this wonderful facility there where it is equipped, and you'll hear more about it, but equipped especially for his practice area. But as you know, because you wouldn't be here if you hadn't heard, Jeff is the nation's probably the foremost expert at litigating sexual abuse cases for minors. And he's litigated huge cases. He's got one $100 million verdict, many big settlements. He's changing the social fabric by litigating cases against organizations that range from school systems to the YMCA to church groups. And he's going to tell you about his most recent victory in the Ninth Circuit last week and why that's important, and a bit about his practice area, and he'll speak for about a half hour, and then or more. No, is that good?
Half hour.
And then he'll answer your questions, and I know that you have a whole lot of questions for him. And so, without further ado, please join me in a big warm welcome for Jeff Herman.
Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. Although when I walked in, I did feel like maybe I had an exam today. At the smell of the school, it's when you guys get older, you'll realize you never forget those feelings. So let me get right to it. And I'm going to talk first generally about handling sex abuse cases. And what I do is I represent victims in civil cases. So these are victims, usually kids, sometimes adult survivors who were abused as kids, sometimes women who've been sexually assaulted. But they're civil cases typically against the institutions. Where that might have hired somebody or was involved in the negligence that led to the abuse. One of the things I've learned over the years is that one of the most important things that I do in these cases is interviewing the children or interviewing the victims. And so I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about that today because I think that's the key to these cases. And it's key for a number of reasons. First and foremost, interviewing a child victim is an important part of the healing process for the victim. And that's ultimately what the cases are about. Now, everything else will flow from that, and it will be a better case if the interview is done correctly. I'll have more information. I can prove the case. But it helps the victim heal. And so over the years, I've developed some techniques in doing that, and I train law enforcement now on how to interview children, and I've studied this a lot, and so I'm going to share some of that with you today. But first, let me just talk about the whole area of sexual abuse. When I grew up, we used to hear stranger danger, and we were told, be aware of strangers, which is true, but it's also a very unsafe thing to teach children. And it's unsafe because 90% of kids are abused by somebody they know. And so you're teaching a child, beware of and be afraid of strangers. And the flip side of that is that you can trust somebody that's not a stranger, which is not true. And so what we know is child molesters come in all shapes and sizes, and they're relatives, they're clergy, they're coaches, and most of all, they're usually in places where kids are. And that's because predators look for kids. A true pedophile is somebody who is interested in children sexually, and it's a compulsion. Now, one of the things is that I believe the problem is worse today than ever. I think more kids are being abused today than ever. Anyone have any thoughts on why that might be? Yes? No, but it's one of the reasons, but not the main reason why I think. Yes?
Maybe because parents are out working, so they leave their children places and daycare and friends and family.
No. One more time, then I'm going to tell you mine.
Because our society is like sexualizing children.
Well, I think it's because of the internet. And you all knew that, right? Look, here's what happens. Not every pedophile is a sexual abuser. There are pedophiles who are content with just fantasizing about having sex with children. And back in the day, a pedophile did not have access to child pornography other than through getting some magazine every 6 months from some foreign country. And that would be enough to keep them content. Now what happens? They go on the internet, and in a matter of seconds, they have more child porn than they can know what to do with. And it desensitizes them. Just like we know adults get desensitized with porn, pedophiles get desensitized with child porn. And it leads to more acting out. Then you add in the complication that pedophiles have access to children like they've never had before. They're literally in a child's bedroom or communicating with them on social media. They're also talking with other pedophiles, and that communication emboldens them, and they make them feel like they're not so strange or different, because in their mind, they truly love children. And so all this has led to more acting out, and that's dangerous. On the other hand, you might notice that if you look in the newspapers any day of the week, you're going to see a lot more predators being caught, particularly female high school teachers. You might notice, you look in the news, and it's almost like every day you're seeing a teacher caught abusing a child. And these aren't typically pedophiles, because these cases are typically adults engaging in sex with teenagers, and technically it's a child abuser, but not a pedophile. But in any event, the reason we're catching more is also because of the internet and technology, because now we leave digital fingerprints. Again, back in the day, a teacher did not have access to communicate with their students like they do now. Teachers, if they would call their child's home, the mom would answer. So they weren't able to get in touch with the students. Now they have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever it is, and I've seen it all. Teachers going on this technology and on the websites, and they're communicating, and they get access to their students. But it's why we're catching them. So real quick, I want to talk about how I got involved in this. I was a commercial litigator, and then in 1997, somebody came to me to see if I could help them. They had a child who was autistic and came home and said, "Mr. Dan touched my pee-pee." This was a 5-year-old autistic boy. And I didn't know anything about these cases, and there really weren't lawyers who specialized in these cases, and it was heart-wrenching. It was really a horrible set of facts, and I said, let me look what I can find. And I started investigating, and this is one of the things I found out, is that this man that the school hired was a convicted pedophile. He had gotten out of prison in California, made his way over to Florida, and basically applied to work at a school, to many schools, and finally found a school that did not do a background check. And it turned out to be a private school with autistic children. And this guy was writing about it, and he was publishing his stories about abusing kids in something called Hand Jobs Magazine, which was a magazine that was actually being printed and on the internet, and being viewed on the internet. And what they would do is they would take out the ages, so they would be fantasy stories. But this man was able to get away with this. And it turned out, once I got involved in the first case, there were 25 kids who were abused by this monster. And to make things worse, he got wind that the police were looking for him, and he fled the country. And we knew he went to Asia. We didn't know where. The civil cases were moving forward, and you can imagine this is the parents' worst nightmare, and it was just really so much to this case that was just so personal to these, it was different for me. And in one of my depositions I found out that his sister of the predator had wired money to him in the Philippines. And so I contacted the FBI, who had a fugitive warrant out for him, and they said, look, we need more. Just being in the Philippines isn't enough. We don't have the resources, et cetera, et cetera. There's hundreds of people we're looking for, in the Far East. You need to give me more. So I hired my own investigator in the Philippines, and literally in a day, he was able to get information exactly where this guy was living, because when you make an entry into the country, you have to leave a local address. He followed up on the address, sure enough, was one of these hotel, motel, apartment type things the guy was living in. So what I did was I had all these moms write handwritten letters to the FBI agent about how they cannot sleep at night knowing someone else's babies are being raped. And I went and I met with the FBI agent. It was a woman. I handed her the stack of letters. I said, please read these letters. Here's his address. And I gave the mothers your phone number. Next day, he was arrested and was ultimately convicted and sentenced to prison, and so was put away. And so that was my first experience in sexual abuse cases. And I will tell you, I made a lot of mistakes with those cases. And so that was many years ago, and I've learned now really how to handle these cases, I think in a way that, as I said, helps victims heal. And that's the most important thing. And it's really, I think, for me, it's a very rewarding area of practice, because I really love what I'm doing, and it's you can see families, they come to me and they're literally lost. There's no roadmap. You know, parents don't get a handbook that says when your child's sexually abused, you know, this is what you should do. And so they're lost. And all of a sudden, when a child's abused, families are dealing with police, they're dealing with attorneys, they're dealing with therapists, and it's a complicated process. So what I do is I treat my interview of the children like a forensic interview, just like the police are doing the interview. And it's important because the big attack in a defense in these cases is always going to be that where there's kids involved is that they were asked inappropriate questions and that was leading. And so what we always do is we treat it like it's a forensic interview. A forensic interview is an interview that the law enforcement typically does when a child's abused. And to do that, it's important to empower the kids. And empowering a victim is important because when kids are abused, they feel like this power or control is taken from them. And you see this with adult survivors who've never gotten help. They'll grow up many times and they'll feel this loss of control. And that's where we see some of the damages, some of the antisocial behavior, et cetera. But by empowering a child who's been victimized, it feels good to them. And you can do little things to empower somebody. For example, when I walk in the room and I meet the child, I say, where do you want me to sit? And they'll point to a chair. Where do you want your parents to sit? They get to direct little things, and that's part of the empowerment. We talk about telling bad secrets or secrets. There's a difference between good secrets and bad secrets. A good secret is a secret that has a happy ending. I got my mom a birthday present. Bad secrets, kids know too well, are these secrets that are making them feel sad. We talk about disclosures, which is being able to tell everything that happened, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But it's important to recognize that most victims are compliant victims. A compliant victim is a child or an adult who has not consented to the sex. And obviously a child cannot consent to sex. It seems obvious, but I hear this all the time in my cases where it's a teenager and they'll say, oh, well, they consented. No, a child cannot consent to sex. They're compliant. Compliant means they physically participate in the sexual activity, usually because they've been groomed. They've been given gifts, they've been given attention, alcohol, drugs, whatever it is, to get them to be compliant, but they're what we call compliant victims. When a child or a victim's telling their story, another thing that I've learned over the years, and I've talked to a lot of experts about this, is the way our memories work. And that normally when we remember something, we remember it in a cinematic way. We remember things in order. If you think about what you did today, you can think of things in order, like a movie. When we're under stress, a little bit of stress, we actually remember things better. For example, if you think back to where you were at in 9/11, you probably remember when you heard about it. But you weren't in 9/11. If you were in those, God forbid, those buildings and involved in 9/11, then your memories are probably more fragmented because your brain releases so much adrenaline that it's difficult to remember the details, and that's how we store memories. And so one of the things that we're doing in an interview with a child is helping them put the fragments in order and tell the story in order. That means teaching a child how to tell a story. And Dean, let me use you as an example. If I asked you, tell me what you did today from after you woke up.
Okay.
And please keep it clean.
So I got up, I got my Siberian Husky. We took
Okay,
3 miles
so let's
out.
stop right there. You got up and you got your Siberian Husky. Now, what I'm asking you now is to tell that story again, but add as many details as you can. And everybody, please watch the dean as he tells this story about what he did today.
All right.
And so I'm going to help you go through this. So you woke up, you opened your eyes, and then what's the first thing you did?
Put on my glasses.
Okay, where were your glasses?
Next to the dresser.
Okay, so you reached over with,
My right hand.
okay, reached over with your right hand.
Yeah.
You picked up your glasses,
Yeah.
put them on.
Looked at the alarm clock.
Okay, you looked at the alarm clock, and then,
Went to the bathroom.
okay, we got out of bed,
Yeah.
you walked.
5 feet away to the bathroom.
Okay, so when you start telling details, what you do, you start thinking back and you're remembering. And this is important because I teach the kids how to tell stories, and then ultimately when I ask them about what happened, I remind them, I want you to tell me what happened with as much detail as you can remember. And the first thing they do is their eyes go up and they're thinking. And what that does is it removes the emotion and it allows them to take those fragments and start to put them in a chronological order, in a cinematic way. And those details are critical in a disclosure. They're critical, number one, because if the child keeps them in their head and never discloses them, it's harmful, it's damaging. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to try and prove this quickly, but a quick aside to explain this. And this concept is that if the disclosure is only partial, and so there's still these secrets bouncing around someone's head, it has a negative effect on them. And I don't think the healing really begins. I had a case where a young girl was abused by the husband of a teacher, and several little girls were abused. And this little girl told her parents he touched her privates. They went to the police. The police said, okay, but we don't need to put her through the forensic interview because we already have many other victims and we think he's pleading guilty, which he did. Pled guilty, was sentenced. This little girl went into therapy for 2 years. The mom hired me to represent them in a civil case. She brought this little girl in, and this little girl, this is 2 years later now, had been in therapy for 2 years. Her hair had not been brushed in 6 months. She's wearing sweatshirts, layers of sweatshirts, which we call body armor, because a lot of victims want to instinctively protect themselves. And so she brought her in, and I did my disclosure interview. And the parents leave. I always have a female assistant in with me, and we go through this process that I'm talking about today. Well, when this little girl told her story, she talked about this man bringing her into the bathroom, taking her clothes off, and penetrating her. And she was describing, didn't understand it was sex. She didn't understand she doesn't know what sex was, but she was describing being raped. But as she's telling the story, there's like this sense of relief and that comes over her. And after that disclosure, I have to now meet with the parents, and that's the really tough part, telling these parents, your daughter's been raped. But we go back in the reception area, and the mother looks, and her daughter is standing in front of the mirror brushing her hair. And the mother starts crying, I can't believe this. And it's sure, 15 minutes later, just instinctively, this girl felt this relief. Which is why I always advocate when I talk to law enforcement and anyone in this area is that we need to get full disclosures. It's not enough to say something bad happened. That therapists, who most of the time, well, traditionally therapists have always focused on just people's feelings, and the disclosure may be part of that. There is actually a new line of therapy where they're getting more into the details, and I think they're making that connection, because I see it firsthand. I've handled over 900 sexual abuse cases, and I've learned over the years that the disclosure is key to the healing. So just as an example of a case I had, this was a 5-year-old girl who was sexually assaulted in a daycare. And the sweet little girl who was was really haunted by the abuse. And this is her, actually, you're going to see just a clip here of her learning how to testify with details. So let me show you this. Is the volume on? IT guy? Is there a mute or something? For the law students in here, this would never happen because you make sure you run the volume before you go into court. Because otherwise.
How are you able to show us this? Do you get a waiver from the parents or from the child?
Yeah, you're not going to learn her name or anything like that, but the mother has allowed us. And this case was tried publicly. This case went to trial. So.
I don't know. Yeah, the volume's all the way up. I'm not sure.
Okay, all right, so. The other thing you do, that we do is, when there's kids, is we qualify them to be able to tell the truth versus a lie. And there's all sorts of techniques you do that, but basically, you can hold up, I have these pictures. Well, you can see one of them, there's a cat there, and you ask the child what that is, and the child will say it's a cat, and you say the boy on the left looks at the cat, and he says it's a cat. The boy on the right, in the orange shirt, looks at the cat, and he says it's a dog. Which boy told the truth? And statistically, if you do that 4 times and they get it correct 4 times, it's a 94% chance that the child understands the difference between truth and lie. And so there's studies out there that we use. And again, we did that with her. The last thing I want to talk about is circle of truth. And circle of truth is one of the ways I use to empower kids and help them to make their disclosures. So every child has a favorite color. And one of the things I do is I have them pick their favorite colors. I have every marker, every color. They pick it. They draw a big circle. And then we put down all the secrets of what happened to them as they're telling me in the circle. And each time they do it, you have to receive it in a positive way. Sometimes they give me a high five, and they start loving to get these secrets out. And the biggest fear is they're going to tell someone this horrific thing, and it's going to, like, the world's going to end. But when the world doesn't end, and you're like, okay, how do you feel? Oh, I feel okay, good. And they'll start wanting to tell you everything that happened. And that's one of the rewarding parts of this, is that you can actually see them being able to begin that healing process. Last thing is the disclosure, the actual questions. And so the way we do it is you have to ask very open-ended question, and then you build on that. So I've done all this preliminary work to talk about good secrets, bad secrets, telling a story, et cetera, and then we start talking that, and I would say, I understand something might have happened to you at your school. Yes, can you tell me what happened? Oh, Mr. Dan touched my privates. Okay, so now that's the starting point. Every question from there is going to take the previous answer and build on it, so that I'm not suggesting anything, I'm building, and I'm helping the child tell that story. Okay, so you said, Mr. Dan touched your privates. Who's Mr. Dan? Oh, Mr. Dan's my teacher. Okay, your teacher, Mr. Dan, touched your privates. When you say your privates, can you show me, point to what you're talking about? Yes. And do you have a word for that? Yes, my coochie, whatever it is. Everyone's got their own word. Okay, so Mr. Dan touched your coochie. Do you remember where you were at when Mr. Dan touched your coochie? I was in the classroom. And okay, so you remember when how you told me the story with details before? Why don't you do the same thing with as much detail as you can remember of how Mr. Dan touched your coochie? And they're, okay, well, and they'll start going through the details. And that's how we get a full disclosure. And that's how we get a full disclosure the defendants cannot attack at all, because it's forensically sound, and there's nothing leading about that. So this little girl, she was abused while she was sleeping in nap time, and the abuser came up from behind and woke her and abused her. And it traumatized her in a way that every time she looked in a mirror, she would feel that something would remind her that somebody could be coming up from behind, and so she could no longer look in a mirror. Her parents had to cover the mirrors with sheets. Mom had to brush her hair. But we went to trial. This little girl got up and testified, did a fantastic job. She was able to tell her story and felt good about it. We won. This is her 6 months later coming to see me. She no longer sees monsters in the mirrors. And it was a real, to me, a really, really rewarding experience. And so she now has a nice trust fund set up. When she turns 18, her school's paid for now, and she's going to private school. She's getting a lot of really good care, and she's doing really well. So that's sort of the sex abuse cases in general. And I want to, there's no way to get this audio, huh? Because this is, can I get it just on these speakers here?
Move the presentation to the desktop instead of playing from the flash drive.
Sure, yeah.
It's over here. We'll see. Actually, we'll see here. There we go.
All right. Okay. So,
Hey, this your boy. Once again, I know you haters keep wondering how this nigga keep popping up on everything. I know somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody. Anyway, we live on the set of Miami Nasty's Nympho 7.
If it bleeds, you gotta kill it. Fuck it. If it fucking bleeds.
that's Emerson Callum and Levon Flanders making pornography. They had a series of videos called Miami's Nastiest Videos. That was volume 7. There were 10 volumes. The girls in those movies were all drugged and raped. They had a particular scheme where they would go onto websites that specialized in girls who want to be models. And one of them was called modelmayhem.com. Some of you may have heard of it. It's a pretty well-known website. And what they would do is they would go on and they would pretend to be scouts for commercials in South Florida. And they would find girls that they would write as a female, pretending they were females, and they would say, are you interested in doing commercial work? You have the right look for this Bacardi commercial we're doing. And many of the girls said yes, and they would say, okay, if you're interested, we'll have someone contact you. And then they would contact them under a different name. And eventually the girls would come down to Florida. They would pick them up. They would tell them they need to audition with the Bacardi. The girls would drink the Bacardi. They would be drugged out on a date rape drug that you are awake, but completely under the control of the abuser. You will do whatever they say. They rape these girls, and then the girls had no memory of what happened. Most of these girls woke up the next day back in their hotels, had no idea what happened, until finally, a year later, one of the girls got a call from her manager and said, you didn't tell me you were doing porn. Sure enough, her manager showed her the video of her being raped, viciously. and brutally on these videos that were being sold on the internet. Police investigation was launched. These guys were arrested in 2007. And there were dozens of victims. Girls came forward, all who were caught up in the scheme, some too embarrassed when they figured it out, some who were just scared. And they were being held, unfortunately, well, in 2008, Model Mayhem, the website, was sold to a company called Internet Brands. Internet Brands is a large holding company of websites, and this is one of the websites they bought. They bought it in 2008. After they bought the website, they learned that their website, before they bought it, was being used by these two men in this scheme to drug and rape women. And so they sued the sellers of the website. And they said there were material misrepresentations or representations that were made where they're not accurate, and you forgot to tell us that the website was being used to drug and rape girls, and now we might get sued. So we want you to pay us some money, and there was a dispute about whether they owed them money, etc. Okay, so that's in 2010. In 2009, Flanders and Colin were released on bond. So they're out now. The lawsuit's pending from Model Mayhem against the sellers. And incredibly, in 2011, a young girl goes on the website. Model Mayhem knows nothing about this scheme. There's no warning signs. There's no information about it. She gets contacted to come to Miami to do a Bacardi commercial audition. The next morning she wakes up. She knows something's wrong because she's bleeding. Her room's a mess. She calls the two men to say, hey, what happened last night? What's going on? And they say, don't move, we'll be right there. Everything's fine. She's smart enough, she calls the police. She's on the police 911. When there's pounding at her door, the police tell her hide, lock herself in the bathroom. She does. Eventually, these men get arrested. Finally, they don't get bonded out, and they've been sentenced to life in prison. So I originally took a case before this ever happened with this girl, pro bono, for one of the girls whose videos were being sold on the website. Every year we'll take 2 or 3 cases that are just, for some reason, either they're so horrific or they're so unfair. I mean, they're all unfair. But in the area of sex abuse, I get calls every day, all day, about cases I can't do anything for. A lot of incest cases, I do these on contingency fee, I can't get paid, I typically, I don't take them. But sometimes there's cases that for some reason we'll take, and this was one of them. This girl who was raped in 2008, her video was still being sold on the website. Even though these guys had been arrested, we took it, we sued the websites, and we got them down. They took the videos down. Okay. This girl in 2011 saw that case and contacted me. So one of the things we had to contend with is the Communications Decency Act. And real quick, I'll be 5 minutes and I'll be done. But the Communications Decency Act was a federal law that was enacted in the 90s to protect internet service providers. It basically came out of a case out of New York. You guys remember Stratton Oakmont? Remember the movie Wolf of Wall Street? Okay. Well, you can imagine there were people back in the 90s who had negative things to say about Stratton Oakmont. And there used to be an internet service provider, a website called Prodigy. And Prodigy had bulletin boards where people could post things. And they had the rules, and somebody had posted negative things about Stratton Oakmont on Prodigy. And Prodigy would remove certain offensive material that they found offensive from the comment section. But they did not remove the negative comments about Stratton Oakmont. So Stratton Oakmont sued them and said, hey, you're a publisher. You're not just an internet service provider. You're a publisher because you are deciding what's okay and what's not okay, what's decent and what's not indecent. So in response, and the court agreed with them. And so in response to that, Congress enacted the Communications Decency Act which to me was really just protected indecent things. Because what it said was, we're going to give immunity to internet service providers so that they don't have to worry about censoring material being posted on their website. So they have liability, they're immune from liability from anyone who wants to sue an internet service provider for something else that a third person puts on their website. Any comments, any videos, any pictures, anything, they're not responsible for. And it was to allow, in good faith, companies like Prodigy to get rid of stuff that they thought was truly offensive and not be liable to for other things they didn't remove, which made sense. But it's been expanded over the years, and it's become basically blanket liability for internet service providers. And in cases there were some cases where kids on MySpace were being targeted by pedophiles. They were finding these kids, and they were sexually abused, and MySpace was sued, and the courts have routinely said, no, the CDA gives immunity to internet service providers. And you cannot, anytime what they said in those cases was that MySpace should have some sort of age verification software. It's available, there's a way to do that. They said, no, that means you're regulating content, you're commenting on content, and so they gave them immunity from liability in those cases. And back in the 90s, it made a lot of sense because there was this fear that if we start restricting the internet, it's going to go away. We wanted to support the internet. Well, obviously the internet's not going away. And I think it's time that there is some sort of accountability in certain facts. And so this case, Model Mayhem case, I thought was one of those cases. And I approached it not as an issue of publishing, but simply as an issue of safe business practices and a failure to warn. And I brought this case in U.S. District Court in California, and I argued that just because they're a net service provider doesn't mean they don't owe a duty to their customers of a known danger. It's just like any other business, like a bar that knows these men are coming in and doing a certain thing in a certain way and putting date rape drugs in the drinks and raping these women. If you have that superior information, you have a duty to warn your customers. It's not about regulating content. And so I filed it, and the federal judge disagreed and dismissed it. So we appealed it to the Ninth Circuit, and then just last Thursday, we got a favorable opinion, and the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit reversed, and in this, I think it's a landmark decision. It's the first decision that has ever held an internet service provider potentially liable, despite the fact that the CDA is in place, and they accurately said in this opinion that this case is not about content, that asking an internet service provider to put up a warning is their own content. It has nothing to do with third-party content. And it's an interesting opinion because it's really not limited to sort of the facts of the case. It basically says is that if there's an argument, if there's a claim for negligence that is outside of the scope of publishing, that's a question that goes to the trial court. I mean, that can be litigated, and it's a question of fact ultimately for the jury. So now they're not commenting on whether or not there was a duty here by Model Mayhem to issue a warning, and if so, what that should have been. But what they're saying is that the CDA does not provide this blanket immunity. And so I've already heard from, there's a lawyer in Washington, the state of Washington, who has a case pending right now. In fact, tomorrow he's arguing before the Supreme Court in Washington, the state of Washington. His case is against Backpage. And his argument there is that Backpage has all these escort ads, which is really trafficking, and a lot of it's child trafficking. And they're not a publisher, and so they think they claim to have protection of the CDA. But what Backpage has done is they've put warning signs on there for the pimps. And they have these information posted on back page on what pimps should do, how the police are looking for them, these kinds of things. And so the argument there, and I just met with him on Friday, and we were discussing this, how to use this case in support of his argument, and the argument is simply that this has nothing to do with content from a third party. This has to do with the internet service provider, in this case Backpage, participating, giving their own information to assist them in abusing children and abusing women. And so what we'll see, I mean, this fight is at the very, very early stages. I expect this case is maybe headed for Supreme Court, we'll see. But it's the first crack in this area. For all your law students, this is obviously going to be an area that you'll be very involved in anything you're doing, obviously, technology and the internet. But it's certainly important in the area. I think it makes the internet safer, and we'll see what happens with that. So that's sort of the 45-minute or 40-minute version of sex abuse. And I'm happy to take any questions anyone has. Yes, Professor.
Is the theory accomplice liability in Backpage?
I'm sorry?
Is the theory against Backpage accomplice liability?
Yeah, I mean, one of their arguments is that they were aiding and abetting in this, in this crime against, by providing information, they're assisting them, but also separately, just that it's really also a negligence argument that by providing ways for the pimps to avoid being caught, it's negligent, and without giving a warning to their users that this is what they're giving them.
And what's their argument?
Backpage, CDA. They're going to say Communications Decency Act, we're immune from liability, which has worked up until last Thursday. Literally every case. I mean, there's some bad decisions out there where judges have actually said it's blanket liability, which is not the case. That's not what the CDA says. Yes?
Are there any industry groups willing to amend or look at the CDA, and or is it like the NRA where they fear slippery slope?
No. Actually, just this year there was a joint letter filed by I think like 48 attorney generals from the 48 states to the Congress, asking them to amend the CDA to take away this broad immunity. And of course, it's being fought by, it's being lobbied and fought by some very powerful internet companies. So, yes.
I understand that you're using animation rather than human beings now, and that circumvents the whole problem.
You mean with porn?
Yes.
And kids? Oh yeah, that's been a common practice, which makes it difficult to stop child pornography. Just like in that Handjobs magazine I talked about, it just took the ages out. And those were actual real life stories about kids being abused, but they took the ages out. And there's really no way to. I mean, it's very difficult to stop the child pornography, and it's what you're talking about is coming up with simulated kids being abused, and that's very dangerous because that for a pedophile who's not acted out, seeing the actual act of acting out, whether it's a cartoon or animation, it's just as dangerous in terms of causing them to kind of start crossing the line.
In terms of maybe other cases you've seen in this area, just wondering, like, have you seen cases where maybe like a college institution, like there's a lot of sexual assault on college campuses these days, where they've been held, either maybe a fraternity or an organization within the campus, they've been held liable for things like that?
Well, good question. Yeah, I actually have about a half dozen campus sexual assault cases now that I'm analyzing, and one of them I believe I'm filing next month is going to be a case against a very prestigious university where a girl went to a party, a fraternity party, had some drinks that were laced, and then was raped by a fraternity member. We're actually looking at bringing a claim against the fraternity, the national and the local, against the university under what's called Title IX, which is a whole another lecture, but Title IX, you may have heard about with people traditionally knew it about giving women equal money in sports, but it's also very powerful to use to hold educational institutions receiving federal money liable for not protecting from gender discrimination, for which sexual abuse violates. And so, I believe there's a theory under Title IX to hold universities accountable, because they know that fraternities are providing alcohol to minors, and that girls are being raped because of that, whether they're adding drugs or not drugs, and it's a problem, and the universities have the power to do something about that. And so that's one of the things we're looking at. And one of the only ways, we're going to get institutions like universities to act safely is to hold them financially accountable. Literally, you're going to see next month several cases I'm filing, starting with the first one I'm talking about against a university and its fraternities. And so, and I'm also looking at a way, I believe there's potentially an action against each and every fraternity member at the time. And, these are not traditionally corporations, they're member associations, and I believe they have a duty to act responsibly as well. And I think if these fraternity members start getting sued personally, we'll see some changes at that level. And so, I have a daughter. My oldest daughter is a sophomore, and she's in Greek system, and I just hear these stories, and it's like the girls know to go in these fraternities and don't drink any drink if they hand it to you, because these guys love to put stuff in the drinks. I'm like, you know that, and it's just incredible to me. But anyway, so yeah, good question. Yes.
Could you tell us just a little about your $100 million verdict?
Yeah, a clergy abuse case against a notorious priest who was for decades drugging and raping boys. And over the years, I've had probably 24 cases involving that particular priest. I just filed another one last week. This is the worst example of some of the stuff we've read about over the years, and with regard to a clergy abuse scandal where they're being protected. In this particular case, I have evidence that in 1987, the archdiocese in question, where he worked, hired an investigator, and the investigator went out, found photos of this priest with young boys, gave them to the archbishop, and then received a phone call the next day, stop investigating. So it's pretty extreme. So, yes?
Where are we in terms of extradition treaties in this area? Are the foreign havens as bad as ever for people?
Well, I was just talking to the dean about that a little bit. A couple things. One is there's actually some really good federal laws now under the Mann Act, which restrict and prohibit U.S. citizens from traveling abroad to have sex with minors. And our national age of consent is 18. So technically, if a U.S. citizen goes to a country, Thailand, for example, because they think they can get away with having sex with minors, it's a federal crime, number one, and also there are civil remedies for those cases. And so I've had some cases like that where we've had perps who are going overseas. But institutionally, one of the things that I've kicked around, and I was kicking around with the dean, is whether or not under the Foreign Tort Claims Act, which is this federal law that allows claims to be brought in the United States against foreign governments, where there are certain crimes that are accepted in the world, as being evil, rape, sexual abuse, torture, genocide, those sorts of things. It's complicated though, but I think it's an area, and when interested in looking at some interesting areas to explore, I think it can be done as the world gets smaller and smaller, and we have more information available. It's certainly going on. I mean, just look what's going on now with ISIS and these young girls, women being captured and being held as sex slaves, and ISIS generates millions of dollars from oil revenues, and, there's potential there.
So there's obviously been so much publicity around the scandals within the Catholic Church and the sex abuse, and lots of lawsuits and criminal cases and so on. Do you have a sense that things have changed, that the institution is starting to do more to police this issue internally, or
Sure. I mean, the Catholic Church in particular?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, they definitely have. In fact, most of my cases are traditionally, older cases. I would say the Catholic Church now is like any other religious institution, statistically, in terms of there are going to be, organizations are run by people. And there are people who are negligent all the time. And that happens. I have cases against, rabbis and Baptists, and I mean, you name it. There's predators everywhere. The Catholic Church had in my opinion, a more significant problem because the nature of it's one organization that controlled everything, and so the cover-up and the protection was deep, and so the numbers are astronomical. But now, what I see, it's sort of like every other institution, and there are people who are still making mistakes, but they're certainly not an institution-wide sort of cover-up. And so, there's one of my closer professional friends is the general counsel for the Archdiocese of Miami. Really good guy, and he does what he can and to make things safer, and so. But it's taken a while, and there's still people. Just one example, the poster boy for clergy sexual abuse in the United States is Cardinal Law. Cardinal Law was the cardinal in charge of the Boston Archdiocese who participated actively in cover-up, moving predators around. Cardinal Law sits in a position of honor in the Vatican right now. He was one of the pallbearers for the last funeral. And so, to a lot of victims, that's a slap in the face. And they say they won't believe there's change until guys like Cardinal Law are not welcome anymore. But having said that, there is a lot of change and a lot of positive momentum. And so, that's my perspective. From what I see in these cases. Okay, so one last thing I want to say to law students. You're given a gift when you get a law degree. And for me, I floundered around doing different kinds of litigation. And I found something that I love in the law. And it really changed everything for me. And I would just encourage you to find something you enjoy doing, because you can be successful at anything, and there's all ways to measure success, but you got to love what you're doing, and you'll be a better lawyer, you'll be a better person, and it really makes a difference. And I feel very blessed to have found an area that I love, and as Dean said, I've now been able to create a physical infrastructure in my office to just do sex abuse cases on my own SIU unit where I have 4 detectives working. It's like you feel like you're on one of these cop shows, and I have former prosecutors working for me, and we really we have special rooms set up for these kinds of cases, and it's great when you can be in an area that you love and then really kind of specialize. I think it helps on all different levels. So thank you.
For the last students that are out here, Jeff has brought some special mementos, so if you come up after we close down, you can have. Gary.
So these are coins. So one of the things that we found in working with victims and law enforcement, if anyone ever knows anybody or is involved in law enforcement, cops all have these coins. In the military, they have these coins. They're called tribute coins. And we work with a lot of criminal investigators, et cetera. And so they're always exchanging coins. So we said, let's get our own coin. And we made it a tribute to survivors. And you can take a look at this. It talks about courage, bravery, and justice. But what we do is I give this to every victim, every kid. And when they come in, and when they're doing their disclosure, they're holding this coin. And it becomes this sort of go-to security for them. And we'll see them in trials now in our depositions, and they bring their little coin in, and they hold it. And so it's great. So I brought coins. I don't know if there's enough for non-students. I brought a box. Hopefully there's enough for everybody. So come up and put a coin.
Thank you again, Jeff.